Welcome to the show. My name is James Nielsen Watt, and in this show, we interview interesting, inspiring, and successful people so you can learn the secrets to success and can play the game of life, business, health, and happiness better. And the philosophy we take here is if I'm leveling up my game, you get to level up yours as well. So get ready to listen to some inspiring people who have figured out how to have success in all areas of life. Health, happiness, wealth, business. We're going to be interviewing them in this show so that you can learn the secrets to success that they share with practical advice that you can take and use today. So if you enjoy the show, please subscribe, please leave us a review, and please share it with your friends, because if I can help you and you can help others, then we can help more people together and we can all level up our game together. My guest today is Kerwin Rae, one of the most successful businessmen, entrepreneurs, investors, and international speakers in the corporate world. Since starting his first business at 23 years of age, he's successfully overcome both business and personal adversity to achieve massive success as a high-level entrepreneur. As one of Australia's leading business strategists, Kerwin has helped business owners succeed for over a decade, having taught over 100,000 people in 11 countries and over 154 different industries. Through his seminars, workshops, and consulting, his clients have grown their businesses in excess of hundreds of millions of dollars collectively. Welcome to the show, Kerwin. How are you?
Mate, unstoppable. How are you?
Good. I was just saying before, right? Through my years of entrepreneurial journey in chiropractic college and things like that, following you for quite a while and always had you set the notifications so your stuff would pop up and really enjoyed, a lot of the mindset stuff, parenting stuff, things like that, not just, the business sort of thing. And it's kind of nice to go full circle and actually have you on the show and interview and get to pick your brain. So I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be here.
Yeah. My wife's super
excited. And you've got kids as well, have you?
Yeah, I got two kids. Got a two
How
and a
old?
half year old, 2.5-year-old and a 5-month-old.
Wow. Okay, mate. You're into it.
Yeah, we thought
you have certainly signed up for the university degree.
Yeah, we thought I love kids. Let's get it done. And then, then we can maybe, my friends are thinking, no, I'll have one and then we'll space it out. And I thought, no, let's just get it done. And it's tough.
Get it out of the way.
But
nice work, mate. Change your life, as you've already probably experienced.
It's definitely changed my life. My son's, my firstborn, I got two boys. Firstborn has been my lucky charm. It's what propelled me forward, mindset wise, everything. It's been
good. Me too. Yeah, I can absolutely relate to that in so many levels.
It's like I had to step my game up. One interesting thing for me has been like, when you don't have kids, you think you don't have any time, and then you get kids and you don't really have any time, and you think, what the hell was I doing all that time when I said I didn't have time and I wasn't getting stuff done?
Yeah, no, I agree. At the moment I found out my ex-wife was pregnant, I literally went through the entire business model and just simplified everything based around the concept of time, just to be able to have more time.
Yeah, it's definitely been a different way of thinking of things. Talk to me about how 2020 went for you. A lot of us had to pivot, right? How's it been for you in 2020 personally, but also in business? Because you do a lot of live events, a lot of things going on. How did things change?
Mate, they changed massively and radically and very quickly. On the one hand, we were very prepared. And by very prepared, I was prepared for an event. I've been preparing for like some kind of financial or economic meltdown for about 8 years now. And so I knew some kind of an event was coming. I didn't know exactly what it was going to look like. But then when Corona came around the corner, I remember Corona coming onto my radar on January 4. And on January 15 or January 12, I was in New York, and I just kept on following it. And I was seeing what was going on in China at the time. I could see the mass lockdowns. I could see that, all the major brands out of China weren't shipping out. And I was like, man, why is no one fucking talking about this? And so in many respects, I was a bit ahead of the game. And so we did our first biosecurity threat response plan on January 24. And then, we proceeded to carry on with business. And I think by the time Corona hit, all of our clients were fully across what was going to happen, the lockdowns. And it was really interesting because at first when I introduced these concepts to my clients, they're like, no, this stuff is never going to happen. And this is about 6 weeks out before it actually did happen. So on the one hand, we were very prepared, but on the other hand, how do you prepare for a once in a lifetime pandemic? There are only so many things that you can do to prepare. And we did as many as what we could. Our clients And that's probably the thing, and it's kind of interesting. The thing that I'm not most proud of from 2020 isn't me, it's my clients in terms of how they pivoted and how they responded, and the success that they were not only able to in some cases maintain but also create. We had trade, businesses in different areas of trade that went on to have record months, record quarters and record years to date, just by pivoting into some form of a digital model. And so, in many respects, on the one hand, I was very proud of my clients, but on the other hand, when we look at what happened to us, 96% of events companies in Australia got wiped out last year in 2020. Now, many of those are coming back and rebuilding, but 96% is a pretty significant impact on any industry. And we're in the 4% that survived. We took a massive hit, an 8-figure hit. And luckily, because we run good business and we practice good business, we were able to withstand that kind of an impact. Because most businesses, like most of the event industry, if they take a 10, an 8-figure or even a 7-figure, or in some cases even a 6-figure impact, that's enough to take a business completely out of a category, out and out of the running in any industry. But we're very lucky that we have a lot of preparation, we do a lot of planning. And so although it didn't take us out, it certainly hit us, in a very significant way from a financial perspective. But then on the flip side of that, we doubled down on new technology. We doubled down on innovation and pivot. We just finished building, as I mentioned to you when I sat down, a beautiful studio here in Byron Bay, probably one of the top sound rated studios in Byron Bay, podcast studio, full studio and office here. And so, as a pivot to that, we've accelerated our digital model probably by about 5 years, in terms of our ability to deliver events digitally, our ability to do things digitally, deliver to our clients. For most of 2020, we delivered, gosh, I don't know how many events it was, but it was probably close to 20 events, all out of a studio here in Byron Bay. And to be able to do that at large and be, servicing clients in countries that we'd never been able to service before, that was pretty unique for us. But like many companies, we're still kind of getting back to, I guess, what you'd call pre-pandemic levels of volume. But at the same time, I look at the things that we've created, I look at the experience, I look at the innovation, I look at the growth, and I'm like, there's always a fair exchange. There's never a lack. Lack only exists in a human mind in most cases. And it was just a lot of digging to see, okay, where is the balance here? Ow, that hurt. Okay, but where's the balance? Okay, there's that's a great bonus. Okay, so what's the deficit? And just constantly trying to, marry that up and just see that there was balance all the way through.
I think it's interesting because it really shows vulnerabilities in a business, and a lot of us can think we're doing pretty well.
Big time.
And then when something happens, it's like, actually, we had no plan. There's no margin here. It's just not working. But on the other side of that is you got to adapt. You know what I mean? And I think that, if you're running things well, if you're thinking about things, if you're planning stuff, and clearly you had and did, there's all this opportunity. I think that it's fast track a lot of stuff that was already going to happen. Like this idea of being more and more online was sort of, it's inevitable, right? This just kind of pushed it forward, and those of us who already capitalized. 2020 was huge for me in business. It really helped me pivot. My practices were closed, and then I had more time. Like I was in practice, still managing some stuff because I was, emotionally attached to it more than anything else. And then I got a chance to actually be free to do the other thing, and went, man, I actually like this more. I'm more fulfilled by it. There's more success here. I'm happy. I get to choose more things that I want, and it took off. And I feel like without that, well, a bunch of horrible stuff has obviously happened. Out of it has led to a lot of opportunity for a lot of people.
Indeed.
I think I attended a Tony Robbins event, Unleash the Power Within virtual, and there was something like 100,000 people there. And that's a guy that could have fallen over, similar to yourself, without pivoting properly. And now they're running lots of virtual events, and it's opened up a lot of possibilities for people to reach. And I think there's amazing things that have come from it. You said something interesting around limitations being, in the human mind. I often find myself, as we all do, I assume to some degree, coming up against these limiting beliefs that I know aren't maybe mine, right? They've been handed to me by friends, family, generationally as well. And my question is, how do you think we can almost think more without limitations? How do I identify them and pivot past them? because for me, I had a history of anxiety and depression and all that kind of crap. And it definitely came from these walls of limiting beliefs and not facing them appropriately, not pivoting around them, not doing things different. And it's way better now, but still it's like those limiting beliefs can hold us back. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, look, I think, there's two types of limiting beliefs. There's a limiting belief that you're aware of, and there's a limiting belief that you're not. There's probably more, but we'll keep it nice and simple because that's the kind of guy I am. And I think, the biggest challenge for most people is they're working with a speed limiter on their car. They're in a race car, they're in a race, they're in competition, but they have no idea that they're running a system that can go a lot faster, if not for the fact that there's something throttling, the engine's capacity to rev harder. And so I think when we look at limiting beliefs, there's to me, the most important thing that we need to do is become aware, and whether I'm talking about business or whether I'm talking about personal development or parenting or, anything to do with spirituality or health, I always, the cornerstone of all of my content is around consciousness. And I don't necessarily refer to consciousness in the context of a spiritual format, although, it lends itself to be applied there as well. I talk about consciousness in the context of literal awareness, like literally being, I wasn't aware of that. Because the human brain, it's a fascinating thing. It's a cognitive milestone. Its number one job is to filter vast volumes of information to prevent the organism, from essentially going into overwhelm, which, increases the probability of, something bad happening, which can prevent evolution. And so when you consider the human brain processes 16 trillion bits of information every 1 second, the average human being is aware of about 7 bits of that information. Maybe, if they're an elite conscious athlete, they might be aware of as much as 2,000 bits of information. So it's fair to say there's a lot going on in the environment. There's a lot going on in our brain that we are just completely oblivious to. And a huge part of that comes down to not only our behaviors, but more importantly, the way that we think. Because ultimately, our behaviors are a product of a psychology, an operating system. Our psychology is our operating system. And the way that psychology, the way that operating system is programmed will determine the behaviors, of the human. And I think the biggest challenge that a lot of people have is they have these unconscious beliefs, but they have these limiting beliefs, I should say, but there's just a very high degree of unconsciousness. There's a very high degree of ignorance. And so when you have, a limiting belief and you're not aware of it, you, in most cases, will assume that you're not the problem. You'll look extrinsically, you'll look out externally, you'll look at, outside factors. And, one of the biggest mistakes that I see people make, in every level of business is they approach success for the most part as an extrinsic pursuit. Well, once I achieve, once I do this on the outside, then I'll be successful. And then once I do this on the outside and then I'm successful, then I'll be happy. And, happiness becomes an extrinsic pursuit. Success becomes an extrinsic pursuit, not really, lending itself to the awareness for most people to understand that, when we look at success, it's an intrinsic game. When we look at happiness, it's an intrinsic game. And I know how cliche this sounds, but when you just look at the base, when you just look at the stats from positive psychology, from Seligman's work, we understand that, people who are already happy are 78% more likely to experience success in other areas of their life. Yet when you look at people's pursuit, and their goals to deal with their limiting beliefs, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to remove limiting beliefs? Why do you want to, become better? Well, I want to achieve success. And if you could have success, what would that give you that I don't have right now? And they go, well, I'd be, what else? And ultimately, one of the things that I find people want is they want to be happy. And it's like, well, here's the catch, mate. If you're already happy, you're 78% more likely to achieve success. But if you're pursuing success as a pathway to happiness, it's going to be a very long, emotional, in most cases stressful, and uncomfortable game for you, because it does, what we experience on the outside is nothing more than, a manifestation of what's going on the inside. And limiting beliefs, make up a huge part of what we are able to see in our environment. Because the way a psychology is built in my world, and again, I like to keep things nice and simple. To me, a psychology is made up of 4 layers. The first layer of a psychology is the stories. It's the stories that we told, and that essentially becomes the code. And I say this to people, and a lot of people, at first they're a little bit surprised, but then once it lands, they realize the true nature of what I'm talking about. Like, we are $1 trillion supercomputer in a box. Like, we are probably the most sophisticated piece of biotechnology that this planet has ever seen. And so with that, we have enormous amounts of complexity, but we also have enormous amounts of function, that if we were to understand aspects of that complexity that would be able to, access. And one of those functions, that most people don't know how to access is how to use their brain effectively, because the brain is an operating system that when programmed effectively, is going to produce very predictable, very precise, in most cases, very consistent behaviors. But if people aren't producing predictable, consistent behaviors, in most cases, there's a limitation there. And those limitations are a product of those stories, because those stories, that's the first layer. That's how we absorb everything. We look to the world and people tell us stories. That's how, generations of trauma is passed down from generation to generation. Stories are being told. As kids, that's how we absorb information from the environment. We look at what's going on and we make a story in our head. We watch TV and stories are fed to us. But after a while, what our brain does is, our brain, being the efficient, cognitive miser that it is, it likes to create shortcuts. And this is where we get into beliefs, because you can't sit there and think about every story that you've ever been told about money. You can't sit there and think about every story that you've ever been told about good parenting or bad parenting or discipline, without it taking up an enormous amount of headspace and enormous amount of energy. And so what the brain does, in its glory and levels of efficiency, is it creates these shortcuts in the form of icons that we call beliefs. And a belief, is applied to a psychology as a filtering system, so that we don't have to remember everything that we're thinking about, and we can just go, oh, that's right. That's what I believe. I don't have to remember or recall the story. But what's really interesting, and I tell this story all the time, when we talk about, behaviors that come from limiting beliefs, and in most cases aren't even ours. There's an old wives' tale about, a woman who's cooking a lamb roast, and every time she cooks a lamb roast, she cuts the end off the lamb roast before she puts it in the oven. And one day her husband says to her, honey, look, I notice every time we do a lamb roast, you always cut the end off it. Like, why? Just out of curiosity, what's that all about? And she goes, well, I don't know. That's what my mum used to do. And he goes, well, why did your mum do it? And she says, well, I don't know. And he goes, well, let's ring mum now and ask her, because I'm fucking curious, because you've been doing this for the last 10 years. And I've never once thought, why do you do it? Now I am. I want to know. And so they ring mum and they say, Mum, why do you cut the end off the lamb roast? And mum goes, well, because that's what your grandmother used to do. And they say, well, Grandma, what did Grandma do? And they go, well, I don't know, but this is what she always used to do. And so that's what I do. And so, okay, well, let's get Grandma on a three-way call. So they ring Grandma and they say, Grandma, you know how every time you cook a lamb roast, you cut the end off? Just out of curiosity, why did you do that? And they go, well, love, back in my day, we only had really small ovens. And the only way we could fit a leg of lamb in the oven was by cutting the end off it. Yet 2 generations later, they're still repeating the behaviors that are based on a belief system that is completely outdated. And so at some point we've got to become aware of, why are we doing this? And then start looking at, what is the origin of that code? What is the origin of that programming? What is the origin of that story? And is it still, does that code, does that story still apply to today, to this day and age? And that's where, we start looking at the brain. And I don't know, I'm starting to have a lot of my own awarenesses around this, but I look at the brain very much like a bioorganic computer system. Like, it's $1 trillion of biotech in a box. If I could replicate you and put you on a factory line, that's $1 trillion idea right there. But by the nature of the way that the brain works, it's very programmable. If you, and you've only got to look at history to understand how programmable, our brains are to produce behaviors. And to give you, solid context around the nature of programmability. Gosh, there was a story I wanted to tell you. We look at computer science, and computer science for the last, let's call it since the 1950s, 1960s, maybe 1940s, they've been trying to replicate the processing power and the capabilities of the human brain, yet they haven't even come close. Quantum computing is the closest that we've become. But when you consider that most people get a better walkthrough for their iPhone than they do for their own operating system, it helps us understand why so few people really understand how to, utilize the technology that they've got, because no one, and for the most part, has ever been shown how to use it.
100%. You've said so much. There's been so much gold in what you've said. I want to deconstruct that a little bit. I think that what I take from that is, we have to be not trying to understand every single little thing that we're doing and thinking, because that's the whole problem that we have, right? Our brain has to have these beliefs, otherwise it's going to melt, because it can't possibly process everything, or at least maybe it is going to process, but then we're not actually going to take any action. So there needs to be these pattern detectors that we use to filter our life to make us continue to progress. right? I need to know that, this is going to happen when I do this thing. If I'm having to assess every single individual situation and there's no patterns there at all, things are going to move very slowly. But it's about looking at what patterns I'm using to guide my behaviors and therefore my actions. And for me, I look at what am I getting from what I'm doing, and is it in alignment with what I'm wanting to achieve and how I'm wanting to feel. And if, for example, in a relationship, if I'm doing certain things or thinking or believing certain things and it's not going well, I'm going to look at that and go, maybe there's something that I can change. And some stuff I do is I look at my process or I look at my perceptions. So if, for example, my wife's breastfeeding and she's not sleeping all night because I got 2 kids and we co-sleep, and sleep isn't necessarily super crisp. If I'm going and asking her a super intellectual question about some stuff when she's tired, and she gets shitty with me, is that her? Is that the timing or my perception? And so if I'm asking her at a time, it's clearly going to be not the best time to ask that kind of question, and she gets upset, I can look at the process by which I asked her. It was probably the wrong time. Probably shouldn't ask then. Maybe shouldn't have asked it at all. If I say, hey, babe, love you, and she goes, like this, maybe for her that was meaningful. She was not acknowledging me, but she was lying on the couch trying to make sure our baby didn't wake up. And so I'm like, oh no, you don't love me. You're not doing this. You're not doing that. When really I'm misperceiving the situation. And I think that for me, to loop back to, like I said, history of anxiety, depression, things like that, when I'm in that state, there are these programs, these filters that are influencing how I see the world. And they're influencing my perceptions, they're influencing my processes, and they're feeding me information that isn't supporting how I want to be. The only way I changed that was to question the beliefs, to think about the things I was thinking about the rules that I'd created. And it's when we look at it, then we can say, okay, is this serving me from how I'm wanting to feel, how I'm wanting to act, what I want to have? I think that's really interesting. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, and that's, I think, the important thing is everyone's got their own process, and it's important the sooner you can work out what your process is, the sooner you're going to find reprieve when it comes to the things that you're trying to find relief for, because oftentimes we find ourselves in resistance to the reality of what we've created, and it's not until we surrender the resistance and explore not just where the resistance is coming from, but more importantly, where the behaviors are coming from, where the perception is coming from, where the wound, is coming from, that we get to actually do the work. And I think this is one of the things that's missing in personal development, is a lot of people think doing the work is writing out a goals list. A lot of people think, doing the work is a values elicitation, and it's not. Doing the work only starts when you are able to identify clearly what the problems are, and if you look at marriage, David Snarch wrote an incredible book called Passionate Marriage. And, there's an incredible quote in there that I often refer to that says, marriage doesn't start until the problems do. Business, and I would go on far as to say, business doesn't start until the problems do. Life doesn't start until the problems, because it's not until that we start identifying the problems that we have to do the work. And this is what so few people are willing to do. Most people are willing to sit down and write down a list of goals because it's aspirational. But when it comes down to identifying, what are the thought patterns behind certain behaviors, and where did those thought patterns come from, and what is the work that I need to do on myself in order to clear this stuff? I think there's a lot to be said for, that type of work versus other types of work.
It's very easy
Excuse me.
It's very easy to talk about what you want, to write about it, to think about it, to make a vision board. And
Yep.
A lot of people miss the fact that it's actually going and doing the stuff, not planning about it, not talking about it, which is interesting. You said before, I think what's people who are happy are 78% more likely to achieve success. I think that when we are, when we are more positive, when we're more happy, we see things differently. Our brain's in a different physiological state. If you're in a survival mode, you're seeing things in a short-term survival fashion. You're looking for strategies and tactics in the moment, not necessarily, what's going to happen long-term. And in business, I definitely see that with my clients a lot. It's when something's not going right, I'm changing the tactic instead of looking at the overall picture. And I think you're right. When your physiologic state's going to influence which patterns you pull out to use to make sense of the situation. And so if you're more happy, if you're more conscious, if you're more aware of why I'm doing this thing and have I already succeeded, suddenly it changes. I know for me, when it was not about money, suddenly money would flow. And that's the irony. And from interviewing a lot of people, there's this consistency that comes up. The first is get guidance and mentoring. And the second is that if you're focused on money, you're not going to achieve it. And that mindset is the most important part to this. And it's hard, I think, for people who are struggling. I know it was for me, when you're struggling to look at it and go, yeah, that's nice. You can say that because you're rich. Why do you think it's so tough for people to realize that, hey, this is an intrinsic gain, not an extrinsic gain?
Just all you got to do is look at the television, look at Disneyland. You know, everything has been painted in a very extrinsic fashion. But what a lot of people don't realize is the consequences of playing an extrinsic game when it comes to internal motivation, when it comes to internal drive. And, you know, even just understanding, and the behavioral research has already done that. And if you haven't read any of Dan Pink's work, if anyone's listening to this, you know, I'd suggest that you do, because Dan Pink's work is incredible, especially the book Drive, the surprising truth about what really motivates us, is really looking at the core of intrinsic drive, but looking at the effects of extrinsic drive or extrinsic markers. You know, and there's one bit of research that I often pull on from Dan, that, you know, people who focus on money as a motivation are 8 times more likely to engage in deceit, deception, or fraudulent related behaviors. And they're also about 6 to 7 times more likely to experience stress-related illness, you know, that goes along with that. And so there's a lot of evidence to suggest that money or extrinsic factors fuck people up. But what's really interesting is our schooling system, for the most part, hasn't adopted to that. You know, our educational system, where, you know, we're being brought into the world of how to become successful, you know, your first personal development program is school, you know, isn't really, you know, factoring that. And that's why I'm a big fan of Montessori. My son's been doing Montessori since before he could walk. And the methods of Montessori are very much about how do you develop intrinsic levels of drive so that there's a natural inclination for people to want to do things based on, you know, something that's important to them internally, based on, you know, a participation award. And that's what we know. The participation awards, they just don't work. And in fact, not only do they not work, they completely fuck people up. And there's a research paper, or a number of research papers in one of Dan's book, where he talks about where they went into a kindergarten, and their goal was to basically assess what were the implications and the effects of placing an extrinsic driver on top of someone who was already intrinsically motivated. And so they went into kindergarten classes. As far as I know, it's a few hundred of them. And, you know, they specifically targeted the art class, and said, okay, guys, what we're going to do now, for every single person that participates in the art class, we're going to give you a certificate, participation award with a gold star, and it says that you participated in today's art class. Now, what they did prior to this experiment is identify 3 categories of kids. The first category of kids was the ones that love doing art, and they were going to do art no matter what, because they love doing art. Internally, it lit them up. You know, they enjoyed it. They looked forward to it. It's something they actually got a lot of, you know, benefit and had a fun doing. The second category of kids were kids that enjoyed art, but not as much as the first category, but they still enjoyed it, but not as much. You know, it wouldn't be their first go-to thing to do, but if they got the opportunity to do it, they would certainly engage. And then there was the third category of kids that didn't like to do art, and in fact, you know, avoided doing art, and were the disruptors of the class. And this is where it gets really interesting, because what they did is they said, okay, everyone's going to get a participation award. And for the first 2 weeks, you know, they saw some very predictable behaviors. Category 1, the kids who love to participate in art, guess what they did? They did art. Why? Because that's what they always did. The second category of kids who would do art when asked, wasn't their favorite thing to do, but would do, guess what they did? They also engaged in art. No surprises there. You know, and the third category, which is the one that they were obviously trying to target, of kids that didn't do art for the first 2 weeks, guess what they did? They did art as well. You know, if you'd wrapped up the experiment there, you would have gone, oh, well, you know, participation awards work. But no, they kept monitoring, you know, for a few months. And what they discovered, within kids, it was 2 weeks. Adults, we have a little bit of a longer threshold. But after 2 weeks, that's when they started to see the real implications of placing an extrinsic driver over the top of someone who's already intrinsically motivated. The first category of kids after 2 weeks stopped participating and engaging at the level that they had been. The second category of kids stopped participating and engaging at the level that they had pre experiment. And the third category of kids, they just stop fucking doing art. But what was interesting by the end of it, what they discovered was they basically, the category 3, they weren't going to do art no matter what. Yeah, maybe they got them to participate for 2 weeks, but the other 2 categories, by virtue of taking their internal driver, their intrinsic, their internal joy, and going, okay, well, you're no longer going to be doing it for that. You're now going to be doing it for this, a certificate. Just by virtue of doing that, they literally destroyed, hundreds of kids' drive. I know they probably went back and fixed it up. Well, hopefully they did, when it came to pursuing something that they knew they already enjoyed. And so when we look at intrinsic motivation, it's a big part of the puzzle. It's a massive part of the performance game, because at some point you've got to realize the world's not going to show up the way that I want every fucking day. The people aren't going to show up as I want. The world's not going to show up as I want. The clients, the only person who I have control of in terms of how they or it shows up is myself. And that's where you've got to understand the intrinsic drivers are what determine the consistency and the level of progress that we're able to make in any area of life. If you're just if you want to be a great dad because you want to look good as a parent when you're down the supermarket, you're going to look like a great dad when you're in the supermarket, and you're going to be a shit dad, everywhere else. But if we're trying to create levels of consistency, we have to attach an intrinsic driver to the things that are important to us, so that there's a high level of not have to do something, but want to do something. And, it's interesting because when you look at people who are intrinsically driven versus people who are extrinsically driven, there are a number of correlating factors. What they've identified is people who are intrinsically driven often have what is referred to as a growth mindset. People who are extrinsically anchored often have what's referred to as a fixed mindset. And when we start looking at what's required in order to achieve success, and we start looking at fixed and growth and other variables, and we start introducing concepts like grit, concepts like resilience. And here's what we know. People that are intrinsically driven, in most cases, have higher levels of grit and resilience. Now, why do people who are intrinsically driven have higher, rates of grit and resilience? Because they have learned how to channel themselves. They've learned how to channel their focus and drive into things that they want to do. And even by virtue of it being hard, the fact that they want to do it has enabled them to continue to do it, not because someone's telling them to do it, because they want to. And by virtue of them doing something hard that they want to do, they're learning how to do something hard. Okay. But when you flip that and you get someone to do something hard for someone who doesn't want to do it, they may struggle, strain. In most cases, they may not even complete or won't complete. In some cases, maybe that they will, but they'll do it because they have to, not because they want to. And by virtue, they're not building resilience and grit. They may be building a little bit of determination, maybe building a little bit of willpower. But here's what we know. A fixed mindset will struggle to develop resilience and grit. Okay, a fixed mindset will struggle to identify intrinsic markers to drive towards. And so the real goal here from a performance perspective is to set our world up so that we are, consciously aware of what our intrinsic drivers are. What are our values? Consciously aware of the fact that by pursuing those things, there's going to be things that are hard. And by virtue of pursuing things that are hard, that's going to develop a level of resilience and grit. But there's got to be a mindset behind that drives the ability to adapt and adjust. And that's where we look at the fixed and the growth. And a fixed mindset is someone who goes, oh no, this is how I am. Oh, look, I'd love to be able to do that, but I'm just not built that way. They are people that believe that talent is innate. Talent is something that you're born with. It's not something you can develop. Whereas a growth mindset, on the flip side, someone who's got a growth mindset, they believe that something can be learned. They believe anything can be learned. And what's really interesting is when you look at the fMRI, a functional magnetic resonance image of someone's brain versus a fixed mindset versus an intrinsic mindset, a fixed versus a growth mindset. When you give a problem to someone who has a fixed mindset, like there's almost no activity, because they literally have this limiting belief right there that says, oh no, I can't do that. And so they don't even fucking try. And so their brain activity is almost nil. Whereas when you give a problem, to someone who's got a growth mindset, their fucking fMRI lights up like a Christmas tree, because their brain has the belief that, oh, I can work this out. I just have to find a way, and that's life. When we look at it, whether it be success or parenting or, entrepreneurship or even a relationship, that's life, And so one of the things that we've got to understand is pursuit of anything great is going to be difficult. And so how do we do difficult things? By making sure that they're genuinely important to us.
So if we think about money and participation awards, they're basically the same thing, right? Participation award is the money for the kids, and money for us is participation for the adults. And we wonder why it comes back to that age old, once you start to make some money, you realize that it's not about the money, and money's never going to make you happy because you're putting this extrinsic value on the thing that you're doing. So even if you want to do it, your brain starts to say, well, I'm getting money for this thing, and I'm being driven by the money. I don't really want the money. And so our brain starts to protect us and say, well, let's conserve energy. Let's not even do it. And we tend to give up. And that's sort of how I make sense of it for myself. But let me ask you, how do we, maybe we've identified that we're a bit fixed in our mindset and we're not as much in a growth mindset. How do we start to shift that for ourselves so we can be more intrinsically driven and ultimately allow us to be?
That's a tough one, because there's got to be a value on growth, and if someone doesn't value learning, then it's going to be, very difficult for someone's mindset to shift. And it's not impossible. It just might take a significant event, and the question part of the question you started to ask before you cut out was, how do we do the things that we aren't intrinsically driven to do? Or how do we get ourselves to do things? And I'm going to answer that with a little bit of this, where we start looking at, again, coming back to the awareness piece and understanding the psychology. The first layer of a psychology is the story. That's the coding system. And you're either coding, good code, or you're coding viruses. That ultimately will create your shortcut system, which is your belief system. And your belief systems determine how you filter, what you see, what you hear. And it makes your brain, as I said, it creates a shortcut for the brain to be able to process information quickly. And then after a while, we develop the third layer of our psychology, which is our value system. And this is the most important part of, the psychology when it comes to a drive perspective. Because when you look at what a value system is a motive system. It's a motive. It's something that's important. And so when things are important, and I mean legitimately important, not socially important, when something is legitimately important, then all of a sudden we have a motive, to act on that. And I think if we start looking at one of the biggest things that prevents people from being able to, develop drive, is they actually don't know themselves very well. And again, we come back to that conversation around awareness and consciousness. Most people don't have a relationship with self. So most people, I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with people where we talk about meditation, and I share stories of, the meditation practices that I've done. And, I've done this and that. And, there's one meditation practice that I've done. It's, 10 days vow of silence. They separate the men and the women, and you're meditating from 4:30 in the morning till 9:30 at night. And it's fucking hardcore. Like, it's full contact meditation. And I share that story where I've done it 7 times, and I can't tell you how many times people say, oh man, that must have been really lonely. And it's like, well, it would be if you didn't have a relationship with yourself. If you were completely isolated from yourself, if you didn't know yourself very well, you had to spend 10 days by yourself and do that more than once. Yeah, that would be very lonely. But if you have spent time alone, and this is where I think most people make the mistake. They don't spend enough time alone. They don't spend enough time, in self-reflection and self-inquiry to really understand, like, what are the things that are legitimately important to me? Not based on what I'm telling you, or not based on what I'm telling my friends or my family, based on what are my actual behaviors telling me? And that doesn't mean just because I'm not displaying the behaviors that I want, that I'm never going to be motivated to do the things that I need to. But when we can start identifying, and money's a great one, because everybody's motivated to make just enough, but not more, and a lot of that comes down to, ancestral stories. Money is the root of all evil. Money doesn't grow on trees. We start looking at the conditioning and the programming as kids that we receive when we watch cartoons. The rich people are the evil people. And, there's this whole cultural consensus that money is bad. And as kids, we absorb that shit. We hear our parents fighting at home about money. We start realizing that our parents divorced over fights. And then just in our country, 2 and 3 marriages end in divorce, and 80% of divorces are over financial disputes. And so it's kind of interesting, because money becomes this tangled hierarchy where people go, well, I need money. I want money, but I don't want money. And it's like, well, what do I want? And what I've discovered is when it comes to money, people always seems to make enough just to get by. But then if they get more than they need, they'll come up with the most creative ways to get rid of it very quickly. Whereas for me, one of the things that I've become hyper aware of is money is an incredible way to amplify the expression of values. But if you're not aware of that, so someone might say, well, based on what my behaviors are showing, I have no value on money whatsoever. Why? Because I'm not doing anything to make it, or I'm doing very little to make it, and I find it very difficult to keep the money that I've got. Okay. And so the value on money might be very low, but they've been told they need to value money in order to be able to have it. So they might say, well, no, I do value money and it is important, but their behaviors would say otherwise, but they do value family. And so that's where, some of the exercises that I conduct with my client, I call this one the Fortune 500, where I'll get a client to sit down and I'll get them to write the 500 benefits that making more money will have for their family. And what we're doing there is we're actually creating new neurology, new neural connections that enable people to essentially have, energy running in pathways that have never been run before in their brain, to start thinking in ways that they've never thought before. And then before you know it, all of a sudden, people start finding themselves wanting to do things to make money. And it's not because of the money, it's because of what the money can give the value.
Money is just an exchange, and I say it all the time as well. If I want to buy your pig from you, and I've only got chickens and you don't want chickens, I got to do all these 50 million trades to get the thing that you want, so I can get the pig that I want. And money just allows that to happen more fluidly. It's purely what we do with it and how we think about it. And I've had some really interesting guests on the show talking about money and cash and understanding assets and things. And I think that we don't have time to dive into that, but I think that the biggest takeaway we can get from this is understanding that what it's really for, and knowing how we can use it to fulfill the other things that we want to do. And I loved what you said with the Fortune 500. I'm gonna go and do that, because we are, no matter how much we're exposed to positive psychology stuff and what we're telling ourselves, and gratitude, and planning for these sorts of things, there is still around us friends, family, people that we really care about, the news, the radio, we walk past and somebody's listening to something and we can hear some of it. There's always this narrative, especially with money, that I think is detrimental to a lot of people, and keeps a lot of people in these holes that they find it hard to get out of. And to justify it, we have more beliefs that piled on top, which then perpetuate.
Well, I don't care about money. Money is not important to me, and yeah, people justify it. But, I'd say this to anyone who says that, money is a form of energy that you have a relationship with. And if you disrespect it, if you treat it poorly, then, that will be reflected to you in your relationship with it. But there's no amount of poverty that you can acquire that will help you change the world. Because there are so many people out there that want to do great things, yet they have a terrible relationship with money. And it is the money that is going to enable them to do the great things that they want to do. You want to build an orphanage? Congratulations. I honor that intent. But do you have the capacity and the capability to be able to go out and execute something to produce the revenue or the income or the capital that enable you to build that orphanage? Oftentimes people look at Mother Teresa as a saint, and she is. And yes, if you investigate her history, there's some stuff that would make you probably flinch a little bit. But the thing that you can't get past is Mother Teresa's number one skill. And most people would assume that Mother Teresa's number one skill was her compassion and her love and, her open heart. But when you start investigating Mother Teresa, you realize, fuck, she wasn't actually really well liked by a lot of people, because she was a hard ass. She was a ball buster. And one of the things that she was a hard ass and a ball buster at doing that created a lot of friction was her ability to raise capital. She was a master when it came to getting money, raising capital, or getting time from people. If someone couldn't give you, if she was hitting you up for some money and you said, oh, I don't have any money, she'd go, well, surely you've got some time that you can give. Oh, I'm so time poor. Well, maybe you've got some money you can give. And, that was her skill set. And she was able to, create a significant impact in the work that she did based on her ability to develop a relationship with money in her, in her pursuit to get it.
I want to change tact here for a bit as we kind of come to the end. How do you balance being sort of this entrepreneurial celebrity, but still being a connected and emotionally present father? That I've got two kids,
Yep.
2.5-year-old and a 5-month-old, and I find that there's these partitions almost, right? There's dad James, and then there's business James. But at the same time, I know that who I am in my business world becomes reflected in who I am as a father, and vice versa, because I'm learning from my kids. I'm learning from what I'm doing in everything, including even having you on the show, interviewing you and whoever else I talk to. There's always this elevation and growth that happens because of it. But I'd love to get an idea from you. How do you balance that yourself, from being really switched into this and then switching into dad mode, for example?
Just by giving my time where I am, like, being where your feet are, and understanding that it's never going to get perfect. I consider myself to be one of the best dads on the planet, but I still make mistakes. I still fuck it up. I still yell every now and then. I still, swear. And thankfully my son, I have this relationship with my son that if I raise my voice or I yell, he has permission to be able to call me out and hold me to a higher standard of behavior. But, I think sometimes people think, well, once you achieve a certain status, whether it be money, income, or, reputation or celebrity, God forbid, that all the problems go away. They don't. you just have to learn how to deal with them, more effectively, especially if you've got greater levels of visibility. But what I will say is this: it's just ongoing work. My work doesn't stop the moment I go home, but I don't have any petitions in my life. Like, the way I parent is the way I lead. The way I lead is very similar to the way I parent, and the way I show up on stage is in many cases the way I show up at home, although a few amps shorter, a few amps less than when I am on stage, but it's essentially the same guy. But I used to be the guy that would have the petition. I used to, have that line between business and home. And I just found it just incredibly taxing. And I just started to realize the more I can develop myself as a whole human being, the better off everyone in my circle is as a result of that. Because as a business owner, you don't realize until you do just how much parenting is involved as being a leader. And when you have a kid, you don't realize how much leadership is involved in being a parent. And to me, my son has been the greatest inspiration and probably one of the greatest teachers that I've had when it comes to, the role of being a leader. And being a leader in business is, probably one of the most important aspects of the role of business, because that's what ultimately determines your attractiveness to your team, to create a culture that attracts even more of the right team and even more of the right clients. There are no bad teams. Jocko Willink says it best, and it's confronting as fuck. Sorry for the language. I'm not sure if this is a swearing podcast, but he says, there are no bad teams, just bad leaders. And when he takes that from Navy SEALs, discipline, where they've had, a team that's performing really badly. And then all they do is they replace the leader, and all of a sudden you've got a team that's performing at level one. And, that's pretty confronting as a parent to even entertain that concept that there are no bad families, just bad leaders. And I don't say bad parents. I say bad leaders, because I'm not saying anyone's a bad parent, but I am saying as parents, we need to acknowledge and realize and become aware of the role of being a leader, outside of just being a disciplinarian. Because most people look at a parent as being a disciplinarian, not realizing that your son, your daughters, whoever's watching you, they're absorbing every single fucking thing you do, everything. And you're either passing down wisdom, or you're passing down wounds, or you're passing down warnings, And oftentimes, parents get to a point where they go, "Oh my God, I can't believe this generation." So, well, who the fuck brought them up? So yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned from living a whole life versus a segmented one.
Yeah, I like that. And having been told I was a bad kid and born difficult, etc., and then being a parent and seeing my sons, and especially having a 2-year-old, it's a different game, and realizing that how I show up is so important to how he's going to show up in his life in the future.
Big time.
It's powerful. And just being present. You said it right. Like if it's family time, it doesn't have to be 8 hours with the kids. But when I'm there, I'm there. And then when I'm in business, I'm doing business, and that means that I can do it well. Last question for you is what's the most valuable thing that you ever learned?
About myself, probably. And it's echoing what we're saying here. The most valuable thing I've ever learned is about me. Learning, and again, it seems so cliche, or maybe it's not. I don't know. And at this point, I'm not really attached. But everything we want from life, we're expecting from ourselves. And we are, as I started the conversation, we are, $1 trillion of biotech. But how often do people really try and work out how to use a keyboard? How often do people really try and work out how to use the screen, the monitor, the RAM, the process? How often do people get curious about themselves? Most of the time, everyone's curious about money or relationships or sex or movies or whatever that shiny object is. Whereas I think, as I said, it all comes down to what's going on the inside. And, the greatest thing I've ever learned is about myself. And the more I learn about myself, the more I realize how much I've got to learn, and how many, and it's kind of ironic because I was having this thought this morning when I was training my dog. The more I get to know myself, the more I become aware of my wounds, of my problems, of my challenges. And it's kind of interesting, but then the more work I have to do by virtue of becoming aware of that. And it's excuse me, it's ironic, it really is. And going back 20 years ago, I didn't think I had anywhere near as many problems as what I do now. Now I'm just a lot more aware of the problems that I've had, and I've just, approached them with a level of diligence and awareness, and wherever I can, compassion in the work that I do to resolve them.
I love that. At the start, you said that, right? There's problems that you're aware of, or beliefs you're aware of, and those you're not. And I think that most of us are unconscious to it, because we're unconscious, or we switch it off because when you start to realize that there are a lot of problems, and what that affords you is opportunity to improve and grow, because you got this $1 trillion biocomputer, like that's scary for some people and would rather just switch it off and pretend. But like if you had if you were given the most powerful computer in the world that could do all kinds of crazy stuff, would you be playing Minesweeper on it? You know what I mean? Or would you be doing some proper work? And
do you know why so few people do want to work out how to use their own computer, work out how to only use themselves, or get to know themselves? Because it's a lot easier to expect or to blame someone else for where we are than it is to complete. See, here's the thing. Once you start to get to know who you are and yourself, you start to realize, fuck, everything's my fault. And that is mega confronting, and it takes an enormous level of responsibility and ownership to look at your life and go, fuck, it's all my fault. I really want to blame someone else here, but I can't. It's all me. And, the more work that I've done on myself, the more problems that I've uncovered and the more wounds that I've discovered and done the work to heal and resolve, the more I've realized everything is me, has been for a very long time. And, the sooner you can get to that point, the easier life's going to be.
Look, if I'm late, it's because the bus driver and the moon and the president. And if you're late, it's because you're lazy and got up too late. Right. And it's just the narrative that we use. And when we start to say, maybe it's actually, me, and maybe they've got some stuff going on, that's why they're reacting like that. And we're more compassionate and we're more self-aware. I think things start to change. This has been an incredible episode. I really appreciate you. Where can people connect with you online?
Thank you, mate. Listen, I'm all across Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, YouTube. And we have some incredible stuff that we've got coming out very shortly. We've got the Fast Growth Accelerator that's just about to go in Australia. We have another program called the Accelerator, which we run online every now and then. And we've also got our premium programs like Nail It and Scale and K to Elite and Power to Create. But you can find all of that on kerwinrae.com and more information. And we give away so much content, as you know, mate. You've been following us for a while across the social networks and social channels. So if people want to, you don't have to buy something to get something. You can just go and get something and learn something new.
Yeah, I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Take it easy.
No worries, James. Thanks, mate.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Everything shared will be in the description of the episode, so you can go and grab that. Now, if you enjoyed the show and you want to listen to more, please subscribe, because every week we're releasing new episodes with inspiring people, successful people, so you can level up your game. So subscribe and also leave us a review. We'd love to hear feedback about the show and your thoughts and opinions there as well. Now, if you want to have more success, whether it's in your life, whether it's in your business, we run live trainings every single week where you can get access to me to coach you through everything from health, wealth, success, business. We're doing topics on all things that you need to live a better, more inspired and successful life. Live trainings every single week. Just visit jamesnielsenwatt.com/live and you can get access to that. Now, there's also a ton of resources that you get for just listening to the show. All of that will be in the description. So if you are watching this on YouTube, check the description. If you're listening to this episode, check the description. We've got a load of resources there for you to have more success in your life, whether it's relationships, investing, or in business. I'll see you on the next episode. And as always, subscribe, leave a review, and tell your friends, because there's somebody else that needs to be hearing this, and maybe you're their opportunity to help them level up their game.